let your diversity and background of what makes you so uniquely you be a part of your identity, rather than feeling like that is the reason why you're not actually mixing in. Accept the challenge of being different to the majority. I think that's what is so amazing about it. Who wants to be like the same as everyone else? So own it.
Hi everyone, I am Lola Chang from the Professional Development Forum team, and in this episode of the PDF interview, I am joined with Jennifer Lay, an associate lawyer at Slater and Gordon, one of Australia's most well-known plaintiff-focused law firms. And today, Jennifer will be sharing with us her inspiring story about how she confronted her thoughts and changed her reality in order to help her get to where she is today. And as a holder of directorships across many organizations too, including as a director for Interchange Loddon Mallee region, one of the largest NDIS providers in the Bendigo region in Victoria. Jennifer will also be talking to us about millennial leadership. So hi Jennifer, it's great to have you on the show with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And to start things off, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and what made you want to go into law?
Yeah, so thanks for the great introduction. As you've mentioned, so a bit about me. I work full-time for Slater and Gordon as an associate lawyer and an office leader. I'm in my third year of practice now, and I specialise in work-related injuries and motor vehicle accidents. So I would say I'm in quite a privileged role where I'm actually paid to help vulnerable individuals, which is really important to me. What made me go into law? That's a great question. Definitely the idea of advocacy, and that's really been driven from I guess, my childhood. A bit of background, my background is East Timorese and Chinese, so I grew up to migrant parents that escaped war-torn East Timor back in the early 1980s, and we actually settled in commission housing in Richmond. So I guess you can say I grew up with a sense of scarcity and limitation. My parents were unskilled with little English, so being the first child and a first generation Asian Australian, I grew up, learning English and also advocating for my parents at the same time, attempting to interpret government documents, bank documents for them. So, and what I came to the realization was it was so powerful to be in that position, to be a voice for another person that couldn't have a voice for themselves. So bringing it back, it was just that idea of advocacy, and law really provided that platform for me to build a career in that.
Mm-hmm. And was it a profession that you always wanted to break into?
Yes, definitely. I really liked the idea. I must admit, a part of it was a bit of influence from my parents, where I'm sure most Asian Australians can resonate. You're either a lawyer, a doctor, or a failure. So there was a bit of that going on, and it is somewhat over glamorized in my personal view profession. But luckily, once I got into it, it made me realize that it is a very purpose-driven area, and it does definitely provide that intellectual stimulation that I was seeking. I really loved and I was infatuated with the idea of serving others. So to me, it was only naturally fitting that I explored the personal injury field. So I did actually, I was quite stubborn about it. I did have my goal set in the legal industry.
And as someone who is also working in the legal profession, I remember always finding myself wanting to give up. And especially in the early years of law school, where you had to contribute in class and just have to speak up all the time, I found that the most difficult bit for me. But was there a moment in your career where you found yourself wanting to do the same? So just give up? And if you did, then how did you overcome those thoughts?
Not so much in my legal career. I'm really lucky to work at a very large firm that supports and mentors me. But definitely in the earlier days, in my quite unconventional journey to becoming a lawyer was very difficult. And there were times, I'll admit, that I did break down and think to myself, look, it's just not worth it anymore to become a lawyer. It's just too much work. But what I had to do was really pick myself up and realize, well, it's either I suffer the disappointment of not getting to that end goal, or I just deal with this short-term pain. And just to elaborate a bit on that, a bit of background about me. So I was admitted to the profession in 2017. It was quite a long and unconventional pathway to the law. I commenced my JD, Masters in Law, in 2013, finished that in 16, and before that I was undertaking a double degree from 2009. And when you take it a step back, before that I was actually in TAFE in order to get myself admitted to uni. And that came off the back of actually, when I was about 15, I was a bit of a troubled kid. I dropped out of school. I then actually, a year following that, decided to go back. And unfortunately, due to the time I had missed at school, I was only able to finish through VCAL for the non-Victorian residents. That's essentially applied learning, where you finish your year 12, but it's not VCE subject. So you essentially don't have an enter score at the end of graduation. So, following that, to get into law school was such a far-fetched concept. So I did unfortunately have to go through the hurdles of TAFE, undergrad courses, to get my marks up to a level that I would be accepted to what was my dream uni, being Monash Law. So upon reflection, it was about a 10-year journey. So did I want to give up in that? Oh, most definitely, because it was a decade-long journey to get to where I wanted to be. But it was really, in lack of better terms, just sucking it up and saying, how much do I want it? Is it enough to actually push through this current pain and exhaustion or self-doubts? Most of the time, the answer was yes. So it was really being able to put away the emotion and objectively look at my goals. Do I still want to achieve this enough to set aside these insecurities and doubts I have within me? And that's what really drove me forward.
And from just hearing your story and all the experiences you've gone through, I can definitely sense your resilience and your fearlessness towards life. So what were some of the things that helped you, or what were some of the things that you told yourself to help you make that transition from no longer wanting to let your fears hold you back, and from holding you back and from wanting to take on new risks, and to now instead embracing that?
Sure. Look, I got to a point where I thought to myself, I have nothing to lose by moving forward. And by not moving forward, I would be stuck in the same position that I was. So for me personally, it did take me hitting rock bottom to spring back up. So that was me dropping out of high school and not having that adequate scores. So given that I was at the bottom, the only way I could was essentially go up. It was allowing myself to acknowledge and accept that my downfall didn't define me, but it actually allowed me to grow, especially on a spiritual level as well. I felt like the fears and the insecurities of being judged and being afraid to lose was the only barriers holding me back. So once I was able to accept that and look at it objectively, that defeat is actually necessary in order to move forward, then that really allowed me to let go of that sense of fear and keep going forward.
And so does that mean you now no longer feel any of those fears, or do you let yourself feel the fear and not let it control you anymore?
That is such a great question. We're all humans, so we shouldn't fight our emotions, but also be aware of our emotions and decide how we react to our emotions. So I did let go of my fears, but to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is I let them drive me to motivate me. So if I'm fearful of not being successful in one of my clients' cases, I use that as motivation to really drive a successful win for my clients. But I don't let the fear overcome me to the point where it's paralyzing or impact my performance moving forward. So I guess it's about controlling and having a healthy amount of it that allows me to worry enough, but also be disciplined in what I need to achieve.
Being a millennial yourself and having achieved an associate level position at a reputable firm, and also a holder of directorships across multiple organizations at such an early stage in your career, what has been the biggest challenge for you?
There's definitely two challenges that comes to mind. The first one is balance. So no doubt, as you've mentioned, that I'm doing a couple of things at the same time. So there's only so much time we have within a week and so much energy as well. So, and I've always had this mentality of all or nothing. So I always put my heart and soul in all my commitments. But the reality of it is we're human, and that means we do compromise other parts of our lives. So admittedly, in the earlier days, my friendships and relationships were compromised. The biggest challenge for me was actually having that balance between my professional life, personal life, family and friends, which I am now learning that is quite important. So it's great to have all these accolades or achievements, but it's also important to not lose sight of life beyond work and what is defined as success as well. That was a challenge that I'm currently overcoming. A bigger challenge, which I saw in the earlier years as a law student and a junior lawyer, and a bit with my board roles, is probably not being taken as seriously as my older cohorts. So definitely my age, and also I guess I look quite young as well. Some people tell me I look like I'm my mid-20s. So really, when you're in an environment where you're trying to build your own brand, your reputation, but still want to keep true to yourself by remaining genuine and authentic, you will find that some people will not agree with you or accept your style of leadership or thinking or question it. Especially more senior individuals in the legal industry or the non-for-profit industry as well. So, at times I found it challenging that I did actually feel that I was not getting the same level of respect as my more significantly senior lawyers. But what I came to realize was, the first thing is at first I really let it impact me. I felt disappointed, down, upset. I questioned whether or not I belonged in that space. But I came to realize, as time went by, it is a bit of a slow burn in building trust and understanding with these older generations, and trying to understand why they are, I guess, treating me slightly differently as a younger individual in the professions. And it's quite obvious that's what they've been exposed to in their generations, dealing with a more senior cohort. And it's also emphasising what I can offer, which is progressive and a fresh insight as well. So once again, a slow burn in building that relationships and showing that I respect them, and slowly that was reciprocated as well. I do think it's a space that's a work in progress. But overall, it's not a major issue. I have had great mentors as well, so readily able to help in the legal or non-for-profit industry. And I might add that, when you're coming across, what you're doing is for genuine reasons, people are more willing to accept you in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And just continuing back on to your first point about setting up boundaries, I found that is the most difficult aspect for me right now, trying to say no to like employers or family members when they're asking, like reaching out to you for help, but you're feeling very overwhelmed and overworked. I feel like part of it is also due to my ethnicity. Growing up in a Chinese household, there's pretty much no such thing as boundaries. So how do you overcome that sort of mentality of having to instill boundaries and not feeling guilty or selfish in any way by doing that?
It's always a work in progress. That's what I can, from what I've learned, and I'm still going through that process myself. And I was actually talking to a friend yesterday and saying, a lot of us, especially as you mentioned, Lola, in our culture, to, be that, excellent role model in all facets of their lives. And it's a lot of pressure. It really is. As children to those Asian parents, you feel that sense that you do need to meet that expectation. So I always put a lot of eggs in my basket, but the problem is there's only so many eggs you can put in your basket before they collide and start to crack. And it really means that you're not only able to, commit to one, you're also impacting all your commitments at the same time. So it's really, for me, what I found the most useful utility was actually communicating. And what I mean by that is communicating expectations and being open. So previously I would be ashamed to say, this is actually too much work for me, I can't do it this week. I had too much ego and a sense of pride to come across vulnerable like that. But I've learned to discover, especially with my main employer, that they actually value me being quite open and actually human about it. We're all human, and there's only bringing it back to the time and energy that we all have is quite limited. And if we're burning ourselves to the ground, we can't actually do any of, we can't serve others if we can't serve ourselves. So communications, setting boundaries. So the way I do it is I usually reflect and journal every couple of weeks and see what my patterns are in terms of my commitments and thoughts. And if I sense that I'm becoming quite negative or burnt out in one of my commitments, that's when I do a retake and reassess. Am I actually dedicating too much time to this? Is there anything I can delegate out? Or is this officially too much for me to take on? Or having that frank conversation. So if it was with my firm, I would say, look, I just ran a Supreme Court matter and I'm a bit behind on work. How can we work through this? And they usually appreciate the conversations as well, as it helps them understand me as well. So I found that communicating to the parties and setting expectations. So one phase I like to use is I always like to set expectations by under promising and over delivering. So just so people know what their position is. And so far that's really helped me moving forward.
And that's wonderful advice. Have you always been a vocal person and a strong communicator, or is that something you developed over time?
Well, I don't think a couple of years ago I would have done an interview like this. I'm actually a massive introvert. I'm not sure if it comes across like that. And that's just based on my personal personality and also culture. My parents are very reserved and conservative people, and they've always told me to be that quite gracious, woman as well. So I never really felt like I should have a strong voice and opinion, but what's really allowed me to, I guess, grow out of my shell is definitely the legal industry, the profession itself. It's a profession where you need to have a strong voice as an advocate because you're representing others. Now, when I'm representing my clients, if I'm not confident and strong, how are they to trust me to be able to advocate for them? So I've been put in that position to really build my self-confidence in actually being more vocal. Being before a judge, giving presentations to large groups of people, it is through more practices of those, public speaking scenarios that has really made me more vocal. And also having mentors as well. And it's not, and in the early days as a law student, it was really difficult to access mentors. So although I didn't have actual face-to-face mentors, I actually considered a lot of my role models that from TED Talks as my mentors. Obviously it was one way, but I treated them as my mentors and I watched them, how they spoke, how they engaged in the audience, how the audience reciprocated, and I learned indirectly off that. And that's really allowed me to be more vocal.
So building on your point from before about not feeling heard or seen by your more senior colleagues, and given how leadership skills is not really a subject that can be taught in school, what do you think are some of the skills or the sort of strategies that young professionals can develop or use to help them become better leaders?
I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, law school is great at teaching you specific units, but it doesn't really give you any real practice skills in the real world. So what it comes down to in terms of leadership is people skills, having a high level of emotional intelligence in what I think prevails over intellectual IQ, really, having exceptional organisational skills. First of all, I personally think that being a leader, we are all leaders in one way. You don't need a title to be a leader. These skills we develop throughout our lifetime, really, and it's actively developed through any jobs. Like, for example, prior to my legal career, I worked in a charity, a call centre, a bank. Before and during law school, all those roles has contributed to how I interact with people, understanding how people are wired and how to best influence them and mentor them. So for leadership, for me, it's about influencing and mentoring and facilitating, and just taking the lead, being proactive. How can young lawyers or young law students actively develop those skills? Well, given that it's not really taught, actively seek that knowledge. I'm a subscriber to Harvard Business Review. They have amazing journal articles about leadership, and they are quite big on progressive millennial leadership as well. Also listen to a lot of leadership podcasts. Simon Sinek and Brennan Bouchard are two really great leadership gurus. I try and mix it up and not do textbook heavy stuff because we get enough of that in law school, but just by reading and listening to podcasts, that's really allowed me to understand a bit more about what leadership's all about. But more importantly, have your mentors and actually watch how they lead, and don't just have one or two mentors. Have a couple. Could be your boss is at a non-legal job, and watch how they lead people. And what you'll find is you develop your own leadership style, which is probably a bit from, you know, supervisor number one, someone at the charity, and you develop a mixture of everyone's leadership style into what your unique leadership style will be. But I do think it's so important for young students and young lawyers to turn their minds to this now. It's something that is a part of the job in dealing with people. And like you've mentioned, Lola, it's not taught in law school, but I think it's actually more important. You can always teach the law and look it up, but you know, applying the people skills side of things is a completely different concept that's highly valued.
Just continue on that topic of the about legal industry. So there is a lot of elitism within the legal industry, and being a first generation immigrant who grew up in commission housing and having attended a public school and also later becoming a high school dropout and going to TAFE, did you ever feel embarrassed about your past?
100% I did. I was actually so ashamed of my past. More so when I went to law school as well. You know, many of my cohort came from quite affluent families. They came from families of lawyers and surgeons, or went through private schooling as well. I actually felt like I was a bit of a black sheep. I wasn't worthy. I was actually so ashamed I would lie about what suburb I lived in as well, or I would actually avoid questions about what my enter score was, because I just felt like, once again, I wasn't deserving to be amongst all these people that came from quite, you know, impressive backgrounds. But in due course, I learned that I needed to actually let go of that, because what I was doing was I was actually recycling my negative emotion, and that itself was consuming myself. And also, the biggest critic was me. Like, no one else would have critiqued me about my background. It was me thinking that it was such a bad thing. I'm actually quite open about my past now, which actually has made me a lot stronger, unique. And I feel like it allows people to understand why I'm actually so driven and passionate to advocate. So that's shaped me. It did take a lot, and it's taken me, I guess it was only after I was admitted as a lawyer for me to feel comfortable in saying, this is my past journey, this is my story. But I've learned that I shouldn't have been ashamed the whole time. It's something I can't change, and it has shaped me to be, you know, Jen Lay. Really, I can't change that, and I should actually be embracing that. That's what's unique about me.
On that point, do you have any tips for people on how to, I guess, move away from that feeling of shame? So the sort of rhetoric that you could tell yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully people have heard of the Queen of Vulnerability, Brene Brown, but she talks about vulnerability being a strength, and it is. It is so courageous to just own it. A lot of motivational speakers are talking about that as well. And when you read about a lot of successful people, they have all come from some sort of past trauma history that they are shameful of. Everyone has their own story. So we're actually all quite similar in one way than we realize. So it is letting go of that burden, because you need to realize that shame itself is something that you carry heavily that doesn't allow you to propel forward. So for me, it was actually understanding it is okay to show my vulnerabilities. And it's actually within my control to do that. It's in my control to either keep it there or let it go. So for me, it wasn't an overnight thing. It did take a lot of time. And the more people I was able to open up to allowed me to almost let it out of me and put it objectively separately to me. So I acknowledged it, and acknowledging it really allowed me to let go of that shame.
So just building on that thought of vulnerability, I feel like vulnerability and oversharing, there's a very thin line between the two. And so, like, what is a way that you can use to become more vulnerable with other people without making it seem as if you're sharing and you're becoming too overbearing with your experiences?
That's a great question. With embracing vulnerability, obviously there is that line as well of not, as you say, oversharing. And for me, I think, what connects everyone is sharing stories. So it is important to share, but also gauging where the other party is coming from. So if I always read character. So if I sense that they are quite open themselves, and I will reciprocate accordingly, as that creates a deeper connection with individuals. But if I found that their demeanor or character is portrayed in a way where it's probably not going to be welcome that I do dive into that type of conversation, that I will hold back. So it's about really gauging the other individuals to see where they are at. But I think it is important to share. I think when you're actually vulnerable with someone, you will be surprised at how many people actually open up to you as well. And no matter how different two humans are, being able to open up really shows them that you trust them, and they do usually reciprocate. But in terms of what is too much, it's about, I think it would be a case to case, or in this situation, a person to person situation.
So do you have any more advice that you could give to young professionals with diverse backgrounds, or any tips for aspiring lawyers?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, we are in such a progressive society now, with people of colour becoming more recognised and acknowledged. It's actually such an exciting time. I think the biggest takeaway is let your diversity and background of what makes you so uniquely you be a part of your identity, rather than feeling like that is the reason why you're not actually mixing in. For example, with the legal industry, the fact is it's still quite a white man dominated industry, and there is still a far way to go. But the future is really positive. And I think if more people are able to be vocal and advocate for themselves and get involved, it will definitely, I think, moving forward, see there will be an improvement in a lot more diversity along young professionals. Also, just accept the challenge of being different to the majority. I think that's what is so amazing about it. Who wants to be like the same as everyone else? So own it. In terms of tips for aspiring lawyers, I think it's so important to find your values and purpose, which will drive you forward. Do not do it for the sake of impressing your parents that you're a lawyer. Don't do it for the sake of having the title or the potential awesome income, because that will never make you happy long term. The grass is always going to be greener on the other side. Happiness comes from, in my personal view, a satisfaction of being able to serve others. And if you can use your legal career as a driving tool, you'll find that you'll have a much more fulfilling career. You need some sort of purpose to drive you out of bed. Also, there's a lot of emphasis on the legal industry being quite competitive, and also a pressure to go into the field. And I've learnt the hard way that you shouldn't be defining yourself as just a lawyer. So, previously I was so proud when I was finally admitted as a lawyer. I'm Jen, I'm a lawyer. We are more than that. So yes, the law is a big component of our lives when we work in it, but make sure you do things outside of law, because what I've found is it's the things that are outside of law that actually help you be a better lawyer. So, get that competitive edge by whether it's sport or volunteering, non-for-profit, board work. That all complements on you being a more unique lawyer in the long run. So do look at things outside the law.
And that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much for sharing with us your stories and experiences. I've really learned a lot, and having been embedded today into the profession, yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to the journey ahead and taking on your tips on how to be more vocal and communicating, and also setting up boundaries within the workplace. So I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you again for everything.
Thanks so much for having me.